Welcome back to the DMV Autocross Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Garfield, and along with Dustin Grubbs, we're going to cover a few things this week, but we have a special interview with a multinational champion from our region. But first, Dustin, what have you been up to lately?
Well, I'm still researching the hot tire for this upcoming year. There's a new option of the Vitor for SCCA that's legal now, but I'm focusing on my schedule. What am I driving here very, very soon?
That's right. We're a month out. Registrations have opened for some of them, not quite for others. Some schools are open and they're filling up. So we need to cover that stuff. And we're also going to cover a new series. We're going to talk to Brandon Kyker about a point series that's involved this season. So we'll get to that soon too. But let's jump into the schedule first and let's look at what we got. Saturday, March 15th, you got the PCA Potomac Autocross School. And the 16th, the following day, you've got the PCA Potomac first event. The next weekend, you've got on March 22nd, Saturday, you've got NCC BMW Autocross School. And then on that same day, you also have the Chesapeake PCA Autocross School, Saturday, March 22nd. Weekend after that, you've Saturday, March 29th, you've got the first Mercedes Autocross. And then on the 30th, you've got the Washington, D.C. region SCCA Autocross number 1. The weekend after that, you've got a dual school weekend there again with the WDCR SCCA Autocross Level 1 school. And then on Sunday, you've got the WDCR SCCA Autocross Level 2 school. Weekend after that, Saturday, April 12th, you've got Chesapeake PCA Autocross number 1. And then that same day, Saturday, April 12th, you've got the NCC BMW Autocross Test and Tune. The weekend after that, Saturday, April 19th, you've got Mercedes event number 2. And on that same day, April 19th, is when you've got the Washington, D.C. region SCCA Test and Tune. And then the last weekend in April, you've got that Saturday, April 26th, you've got PCA Potomac Autocross number 2. And then on Sunday, you've got Chesapeake PCA Autocross number 2 as well. So just about every weekend, right? It is every weekend.
A lot going on.
Yeah, maybe a couple Sundays left off there. But the point is, you can be out every single weekend all the way through April, we know thus far, with autocross events. So let's talk to Brandon Kyker now about this new series we're going to see.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Hey, Brandon. Welcome to the show.
How you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
Good. Great to have you. I was telling Dustin before, and I think I mentioned to you that, 20 years ago, there was this series that the Metropolitan Washington Council of Sports Car Clubs put on, which was a conglomerate of all the clubs that were running at the time, and they had kind of a championship series. That was 20 years ago, and it sounds like you're bringing something back. Tell us about what you're doing.
Yeah, unintentionally, we're recreating something. This is called the unofficial Mid-Atlantic 8-6 Club DMV Autocross Championship Series, which is a total mouthful. So we're just calling it TUMA DACS. All the great clubs have great acronyms, so obviously you have to get an acronym. The idea behind it was there's a lot of people autocrossing in the region. There's a lot of different organizations that you can choose to run with. What if we created a sort of point or championship series where you would go to events from the different organizations throughout the year, and then at the end we'd have winners in different classes, etc.
That's awesome. And how does the classing work for this?
So a lot of people getting into autocross are very used to just raw times, or there's the big monolith, which is the SCCA. And the SCCA classing system sometimes can be a little overwhelming for people. So we're coming up with our own professional autocross scoring system, or PACS. That's probably something people have heard of. Our PACS is going to be a lot simpler. Based on a couple of your mods, or if your car falls into some SCCA classes, you'll fall into between like 1 to 7 categories of cars, and then you'll be competing against cars in those 1 to 7 categories. So nothing too crazy this time.
Okay. And how does somebody get involved in this?
Super, super simple. So a lot of people, again, who are autocrossing are already participating in different clubs and regions. You've got SCCA going all year. That's very competitive. It's got very strict classing. There's groups like Mercedes-Benz, which is just run what you brung, no classing. It's just raw times. So people already going to these events, you'd say, okay, which events are part of our series? You just go to our website, www.midatlantic86club.com. Under our event section, you'll see Autocross Championship Series. We've picked out a schedule of 9 events for the year. These are all events that are happening when there's no other organization conflicting with it. So that weekend, there's just going to be one club running one event, and you just go to those events. It's very simple. We're going to calculate all your times at the end of the year based on your classing, and we're going to award points that way.
Awesome. Is there any cost to it, or how does that work?
Yeah, so in addition to registering for existing autocross events and the costs associated with that, to register for our series, and this is coming soon, the registration is not open, we're just going to charge between $10 or $20. We haven't decided yet, but the cost is very simple. We're doing a little back-end work on our side where we're taking all the times, tabulating everything, but really we want to give out trophies and awards. So if 20 people sign up and it's $10 a person, that's $200. That means $200 at the end of the year for trophies or prizes or something like that. Very straightforward, very transparent.
Nice.
So where can we see it? The schedule's posted, 9 events. Do you know the first one off the top of your head?
Pretty sure the first event is the SCCA WDCR event at Regency Furniture Stadium in March. I'm pretty sure that's the first one. I have to check. Our schedule is really easy to find. So the Mid-Atlantic 86 Club, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, but we have a website. It's just MA86 Club or midatlantic86club.com. Both of those URLs will take you to the club. If you put that in /autocross, it'll take you right to the page. We're doing 9 events, but you don't have to do all 9. We're going to drop 3 from the scoring. So just come to as many as you want. These are events you'd probably already be going to. And the whole point was, again, sometimes people are really into the serious classing of SCCA. Sometimes people just like the relaxed scoring or lack of scoring at Mercedes-Benz or Porsche Club, which has kind of an intermediary. We're just pulling those events, all of those events, and you get to pick and choose which ones you go to.
Cool. That sounds like a great time. I think I'm probably going to be signing up for this.
Yeah, you have to, because you might win. You might win, Dustin. So
yeah, well, and I'm looking at my schedule. I'm already hitting a lot of Mercedes and maybe a couple Porsches, the DCs. So it sounds like I'm going to be at those anyway.
Exactly. That was the whole point of this. These are all events that you're already going to. Maybe you're a novice in autocross. You're not really sure which events to go to. So this also might give you a guide of like, hey, I know people will be going to this event. I know people are going to this event. Sometimes, so it might give a little clarity if you don't know which events to choose. Or maybe if you hadn't done an SCCA event and you were a little afraid to, be like, okay, well, I'm not really into SCCA classing. It's a little too competitive to me, but I'll go to this one because it's the 3rd event in the TUMA DACS series. So that's the whole point, is we're going to expose people. I have never been to a PCA event, and now I'm going to PCA events this year. So this was kind of also a motivator for me and a lot of other people.
Very cool, Brandon. Well, thank you very much. We'll make sure we have that information up on the screen for folks to be able to find you, and we look forward to seeing you throughout the season.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys too. Can't wait to get this off. There'll be a lot of announcements coming out as we get the details out in the next month or so.
Sounds great. Brandon, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Looking forward to this season.
Great. Dustin, next we've got an interview with a longtime autocrosser and friend of mine, John Vitamvas. Okay, John, so I've known you for a long time, but let's start off with a good introduction of how you got started in the sport.
Sure. So cast your mind back to 1997. I had a second-gen RX-7 turbo, so that was like a 1987 kind of egg-looking version that needed an engine rebuild. And at the time, internet message boards were not a thing, right? There were mailing lists. I was a member of an RX-7 mailing list, and I found out that you could get cheaper than OEM, dealer price parts from the Mazda competition parts department. So I joined that and did 2 autocrosses to validate my membership, and I kind of have been, stuck with it since then.
So you got into autocross because you were just trying to get a discount from what is now Mazda Motorsports, their catalog that they give discounts to racers.
Yeah, ultimately, I owe my autocross career to owning an unreliable Mazda.
Now, were you doing any sort of racing before autocross, or autocross was your first thing?
No, autocross was my first entry. I mean, it was like these mailing lists. There was like an autocross and track thing, and people were talking about going to the track. But I was like 19 years old. I couldn't afford to go to the track. I could barely afford to go to a local autocross. So that's what I did.
Do you remember how your first event went?
Vaguely. I mean, it was not good. I wasn't good when I started. I wasn't good for years and years after I did it for the first time. Right? It took a long time, but it was fun. I mean, I got hooked on it right away. Just sliding the car around and driving on all season tires because I lived in Wisconsin. It was just it was a riot.
That's funny. So your car choices over the years, how many different cars have you owned for the purpose of autocross?
Well, I mean, I've had a bunch of cars, but and I've autocrossed pretty much all of them. But I think the first car that I really bought that I intended to autocross was my E36 M3, 1995 M3. When I moved down to Maryland in 2002, I bought that pretty much right away. And it wasn't competitive, but I'd always wanted one. And it was fun. I followed that up with a 986 Boxster S, so like an early 2000s Boxster S for A stock was the class at the time. It was pretty competitive. I won a couple pro solos with it. Did okay at nationals. Followed that with a Corvette Z06, C5 Z06 for super stock at the time. Followed that with a Street Touring S 1989, 1990 RX-7 GTU S, so a natural aspirated second gen. Not the car for the class. Really bad idea, but kind of my first introduction into building a car. Sold that, bought the DSP E46 BMW, sold that, and built the Street Mod XA RX-8 that I have now.
Now, during this whole process of all these cars, and you kind of started to briefly touch on it before, when did you actually feel like, hey, I'm pretty fast at this?
I think probably when I co-drove with Clyde Kaplan, right after he bought his RX-8, when they were in maybe A stock at the time, but maybe B stock, and he offered me a co-drive, and I just gelled with that car right away. I mean, first couple local events, I think I was in like the top 10 in index a couple times, and I felt, that's the point at which you kind of feel like a hero, in like the local region. We had a competitive region in DC region. But that was the first time I think I really felt like I got it.
Gotcha. So you mentioned the STS RX-7 being your sort of first foray into building a car. That fascinates me the most, just because that's not me. I like to tinker, I like to make changes, stuff like that. But I remember when you approached that project more of almost like a ground up, not like a frame off like people talk about. But the point is, you pulled the whole car apart and you kind of started over with it, right? Tell me about that. What made you decide to do things that way?
Yeah, well, I had this idea that I thought I would have a car that would be particularly good for pro solo. It made a lot more power than anything else in the class, or had the potential to. Rear-wheel drive, good differential, which doesn't really exist in street touring, or didn't at the time. And I just thought it'd be fun to be able to, build a car that I, the way I wanted to, at least at the time, right? The suspension that I wanted to run on it, and the wheels and tires that I wanted to run, and the exhaust, and it was engine tuning. There are a bunch of appealing things about that, and like the tinkerer builder that let me kind of dip my toe into those waters.
Was this the longest project car at the time? Like, had you ever spent this much time on a car before that?
Oh yeah, by far the longest at that time. Mostly because before that I didn't have any money. Like just being in college or high school, I didn't have the money to tinker with cars. It was basically just I had the money to keep them running and put gas in them, and that was about it. Pay the insurance. So it was the first time I had like a real career and enough paycheck to go and buy the things that I wanted, because it's not cheap.
When you worked on that project, did you have a garage at the time? Did you have a separate garage or someplace to work on it the whole time?
Just, the 2-car garage at where my wife Marissa and I lived at the time in Columbia. So it was kind of, it was my half of the garage. I was building the car in that half of the garage, and and some of the stuff in the basement too, like a little basement workshop.
And then how did you decide as you went on from there, from that car? Well, first of all, how did that car do?
Like I said, I won a couple pro solo events with it against some pretty good drivers. I took it to nationals one year, and I took it to spring nationals maybe 1 or 2 years, and realized that when you're in a class where like STS, where you're limited to a certain width tire and wheel, you want the lightest car in the class. And it was like 500 pounds heavier than the lightest cars in the class. It was not the right way to go. But I think I did pretty well. I think I trophied at nationals with it the one year that I brought it there. But it was apparent that it was not the way to go. But it was fun.
So was that just 1 year, or did you go 2 years with that car?
I did 1 full year and then a partial second year. And decided to pull the plug and drive something else at nationals the second year.
And what did you drive at nationals then? Because did you buy another car? Or did you get a co-drive?
Man, that's what I'm trying to remember. I think that was the year that Greg Olson and I decided to go in together and buy the DSP car, the DSP BMW.
Which was not DSP at the time when you bought it.
Right? It was allegedly it was DSP, but it was not what it was advertised to be. I'll tell you that once I tore into it and found out. I think ultimately we paid a fair price for the car given what we got, but it was not what we expected.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the red 330, the E46 330.
E46 right? 330 coupe. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then after that, of course, is what is a fairly famous car now for your championships and King of the Mountain, which is the RX-8. What drew you to that from the DSP car?
Oh, geez. I mean, if you talk to Clyde Kaplan, and the years that we spent in the RX-8 driving, thousands of miles to events, the thing that he heard over and over again was how I loved the RX-8, but I wanted like a reasonable engine in it, not the factory rotary that was really, to me, kind of underwhelming. It was just an amazing chassis in stock form, with just Coney shocks and maybe a bar. It was just unreal. And I had this vision in my mind of taking the rotary out of it, which is weird because I was a rotary guy from way back, my first car, and I loved them. But putting a turbo 4-cylinder in it, and I just thought that was going to be a world beater. And it's not a world beater, but it's an awesome car.
Nice. Now, when you started, I guess probably may have been in your current house when you had the DSP car.
Yeah.
So you got a little more garage space there, right?
Right.
And how is that set up? I mean, a lot of us, including myself, I finally got the garage that I wanted, and I put a lift in it because I always wanted it. I figured I worked hard enough. I finally got it, and it's made everything a world better. It makes me regret not having that kind of stuff sooner. Tell me how you kind of outfit your garage. Like, what type of equipment do you have in your garage that allows you to do all this work on your own?
Yeah, I don't have a huge garage. The detached 2-car is what I do all my work in for the cars, right? I keep all the car stuff segregated there. But like you, I bought a lift. It's one of the the lower lift, like it's a Max Jacks lift that works with a lower ceiling height. I think the basics are a TIG welder, a MIG welder, especially an AC TIG welder, so you can do, aluminum welding, floor jack stands, full toolbox, and I've got a tire machine and a tire balancer, which, I think is a reasonable mandatory thing for an autocrosser like Track Rat to own.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned those two, and I'm one of these people that will tell you over and over again, I should have bought a tire machine a long time ago. I mean, I've just done so many tire changes, and now you've done so many tire changes for me. But
I was like, if you had a tire machine, I'd never see you.
That's not true, but probably pretty close. But a lot of times I think with this equipment that seems so out of reach, you stop and think how much time you spend in cars, especially as we get into racing in some form or another. And you realize this isn't that much money for these kind of things to make your life a lot easier. And that's why I wanted to kind of touch on in this subject, because when you really get down to it, if you're going to do this work on your own, it just drives you nuts to not have what you need. And so I think that's where I admire the setup you have and the dedication to working on your own stuff. And of course, a lot of your knowledge is self-taught, right?
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, I'll say I learned a ton from Larry Casey. Larry gave me kind of like the first, beginner welding lessons. He was the one that inspired me to go and buy my own welder. He kind of helped me pick out the one that would be a good fit. Our friend Mike Klein, who's no longer with us, but he as well, I was over at his house quite a bit, welding projects, watching him. He was showing me how, some of the things that he had done, because he had built a V8 NB Miata, and he built, a custom set of headers and all that. So it's self-taught, but it's like you learn so much from the people around you.
Yeah. Well, that's the great thing about the sport too, is you have all these connections. I mean, I always talk to people about not just even our local connections, but the national connections. You end up with friends all over the country.
Oh, yeah.
I've got stories of how those connections have helped me and my son in the past while we're traveling and things like that. But those connections you can make in the sport are really valuable. a pretty hardcore autocrosser, I would say about as hardcore as it gets. Do you do any track stuff?
So what's funny is I had the opportunity early in college. I had a friend who was a member of the Porsche Club, and he would sometimes have some free entries to track events. So Nelson Ledges was the nearest track, and it was pretty ratty in the late 90s. And so I did like 5 or 6 track events when I was in college with my second gen turbo. And I've done some track crosses with the Get Fast group, the Refrigerator Bowl stuff that they do in the winter at Summit. If you consider that a track event. But to be honest with you, I didn't really enjoy. I got bored pretty fast on track because you're just sort of racing yourself, and it's just not. It just doesn't tickle my competitive interest, right?
Right. A lot of us probably would, you can always get into that debate of, club racing or track racing versus autocross. And of course you got the one side that says, well, we never hit those high speeds, but it's intense, and it may be short, but it's intense, and it's always intense. There's never really a straightaway. If you're going
right.
straight, you've done something wrong. Right.
Yeah. I mean, track, I always think about it like this, you go to a track and whatever, you get, 10 turns or something like that. Well, autocross, you might get the same thing, but you get it like all shrunk down and all the straightaways, all the straight elements removed. Right. So you're constantly planning. You're exiting one corner and you're already planning where you want to be for the next one instantly, right? There's no time to place the car. You have to place it as you're exiting, because as you're exiting, you're entering. So,
yeah.
Very cool. So talk to me about what you see in the future. I mean, now you've got a national championship winning RX-8 in Street Mob, which has also won the King of the Mountain twice. The car's won twice.
Yep.
What do you see? I mean, I know we ask ourselves this a lot, and most of the time you think you're going to stick with the same car. Do you have any thoughts on changes coming up?
I mean, I think the beauty of running a street mod type car, Extreme Street, I'm going to run the car in Extreme Street, I think a bunch this year, which is like the street tire version of street mod. The beauty of it is that you are never really done, I don't think. There's always something to improve. Like, I'm always thinking about things that I can do to make the car faster. I switched it to an automatic last year after having the 4-speed in it. I think that made it faster, easier to drive, more reliable. So I've got some things that I think can be done to make the car faster. But the other thing I really want to get involved with is helping out some other people in the community make their cars faster. I did an ABS conversion, a motorsport ABS conversion on Sam Strano's C5 track car. I'm doing an ABS conversion on your XU Stalker, which I think is going to make that thing just amazingly easy to drive and much faster for you and your wife Lisa. I want to do more of that stuff. I want to do start doing some light fabrication for people and help them get faster.
I'm going to put you on the spot because I didn't prep you for this, but try to make try to run down a list of what's been done to the RX-8. And I mean, more of a general list, but just if you want to impress somebody with what this car has, that's not the street RX-8, what would you say? I mean, just run down that list if you can.
Yeah. So usually what I tell people when they ask, what's been done to it, and I ask them if they know, what like an EcoBoost engine is, like out of a Ford Focus RS or something. I say, well, it's got that engine, but it's got that automatic transmission out of a Mustang, and it's got the rear end out of an independent rear Mustang, and it's got 335 millimeter tires on it. There aren't many RX-8s out there that have 335s on 12-inch wheels, that have a dual element wing and a carbon splitter and motorsport traction control and aftermarket engine management. The whole car has been rewired. I mean, it's like, I don't know that there is a part of that car that is as it left Mazda's factory.
Maybe a windshield or something like that.
Yeah, well, it's got an aftermarket windshield because a tree fell through it like the first year I owned the car. The one night I left it outside on the trailer, a tree fell into it.
So this is still a registerable car on the street, though.
It is street registered. It's insured. I drive it on the street. I drive it to work sometimes, or drive it to get to get dinner, yeah, I drive it all the time. It's a riot, man. I mean, it's like I said, I always wanted a 500 horsepower RX-8, and I have it, and I'm going to use it.
Well, John, this has been great. It's a wealth of knowledge that you bring, and it's really cool to see, how successful you've been the last couple of years. So thanks for being with us today.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. It's been a blast. Appreciate it.
All right, Dustin, thanks for helping me out this week. And thanks everybody. We'll expect some comments or some feedback on DMVAX podcast at gmail.com. And other than that, we'll see you on the next one.